To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, welcome and thank you. Your presence makes these stories worth sharing. We'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Lucas Reed had built his life on 3 pillars: precision, loyalty, and control. At 35, he owned Reed Security Solutions, a private investigation and personal protection firm that served Chicago's elite. His clients trusted him with their darkest secrets, their safety, their lives. What they didn't know was that Lucas had learned early that trust was a weapon, one that could cut both ways. Growing up in Detroit's roughest neighborhoods, Lucas had watched his mother work 3 jobs to keep food on the table after his father abandoned them. He'd learned that survival meant being smarter, harder, and more ruthless than everyone else. By 18, he'd earned a full scholarship to Northwestern, studying criminal justice while running small-time security gigs on the side. By 25, he'd built his company from nothing. Victoria Manning had been his greatest triumph, and, he now suspected, his greatest mistake. They'd met at a charity gala 5 years ago. She, the daughter of real estate mogul Robert Manning, beautiful and poised in her silk evening gown. He, the self-made man in his first tailored suit, determined to prove he belonged in her world. Their courtship had been swift and intense. Victoria seemed enchanted by his rough edges, his stories of climbing from nothing to something. He'd been intoxicated by her grace, her connections, the way she made him feel like he'd finally arrived. Trevor Walsh had been his college roommate, his best man, his business partner in the early days before Lucas bought him out. Trevor came from old Chicago money, the kind that whispered rather than shouted, that opened doors with a phone call rather than a check. He'd introduced Lucas to the right people, helped him land his first major contracts. When Trevor decided private security wasn't for him and moved into consulting, a deliberately vague profession that seemed to involve a lot of expensive lunches and golf games, Lucas had been happy to buy his shares and remain friends. The 3 of them had been inseparable. Trevor was Lucas's best friend, Victoria's charming companion at dinner parties when Lucas was too busy with work. Lucas had trusted them both completely. He'd built his marriage on that trust, shared his dreams, his fears, his plans for the future. Victoria had seemed perfect. She managed their social calendar with military precision, hosted dinner parties that impressed his clients, and spoke knowledgeably about art, wine, and politics. She'd given up her marketing job after they married, claiming she wanted to focus on supporting Lucas's career and building their family. They'd been trying for children for 2 years without success, something Victoria grew increasingly frustrated about. Lucas had suggested they see a specialist, but Victoria always had an excuse to postpone. Looking back now, Lucas realized he'd been so focused on building his empire that he'd missed the signs. Victoria's sudden interest in yoga classes that ran late into the evening. Her new enthusiasm for weekend spa trips with girlfriends whose names seemed to change every time she mentioned them. The way Trevor had started dropping by when Lucas was out of town, claiming he was checking on Victoria or picking up something he'd left behind. Lucas had been blind to it all because he'd made the fatal mistake of believing that loyalty was reciprocal. He'd learned that lesson in the hardest way possible at Sacred Heart Hospital, standing in a sterile waiting room while the 2 people he'd trusted most twisted the knife in his back. Chapter 2. The Revelation. The call had come at 2:47 a.m. Lucas remembered the exact time because he'd been reviewing security footage for a client, his 4th cup of coffee growing cold as he analyzed the movements of a suspected corporate spy. The number was unfamiliar, but he always answered his phone. In his line of work, emergencies didn't keep business hours. Mr. Reed? This is Paramedic Martinez with Chicago Fire Department. Your wife is in critical condition. You need to come to Sacred Heart Hospital immediately. The words hit Lucas like a physical blow. The coffee cup slipped from his hand, shattering against his office floor as he grabbed his keys and ran. During the 15-minute drive through empty streets, his mind raced through possibilities. Car accident, robbery, home invasion. Each scenario made his foot press harder on the accelerator. Sacred Heart's emergency room buzzed with controlled chaos even in the early morning hours. Lucas rushed to the reception desk, his heart hammering against his ribs. Victoria Reed, he said breathlessly. My wife. They brought her in. Room 7. The nurse said without looking up. Down the hall, turn left. Lucas followed the directions, his footsteps echoing off the polished floors. He could hear voices through the partially opened door, familiar voices that made him slow his approach. "She's going to be okay." Trevor's voice, soft and comforting. "I promise, Vic. I won't let anything happen to you. I should have listened to you." Victoria's voice, weak but audible. "I should have been more careful. If Lucas finds out." "He won't," Trevor interrupted. "The plan is still good. Once you're discharged, we'll make it look like he did this. Then everything will be ours." Lucas felt the blood drain from his face. He pressed himself against the wall outside the door, straining to hear more. "The pills you gave me," Victoria continued. "They made me so sick. Are you sure it won't show up in the blood tests?" "It'll be out of your system in 12 hours, Trevor assured her. "Just a little gastric distress and dehydration. Nothing that would suggest poisoning. But it was realistic enough to get you admitted and start building our case against Lucas." Lucas's hands clenched into fists. They'd staged this. Victoria had deliberately made herself sick to create evidence against him. But evidence of what? Before he could process the full implications, footsteps approached from behind. Lucas turned to see Robert Manning, Victoria's father, storming down the hallway with Diana, Victoria's sister, close behind. Both looked haggard and furious. Lucas straightened, preparing to face their grief and concern, expecting them to seek comfort in shared worry. Instead, Robert Manning grabbed Lucas by the shirt and slammed him against the wall. "You did this." Robert's face was red with rage, spittle flying as he spoke. "You poisoned my daughter, you sick bastard." "What?" Lucas struggled against the older man's grip. "I just got here. I don't know what." "Don't lie to me." Robert's hands tightened on Lucas's shirt. "Trevor told us everything. How you've been abusing her, threatening her, slipping things into her food when she tried to leave you." Diana stepped closer, her face twisted with hatred. "We know about your sick games, Lucas. How you've been slowly poisoning her to keep her weak and dependent. Trevor's been documenting everything." Lucas felt reality shifting beneath his feet. "That's insane. I would never hurt Victoria. I love her." "Love?" Diana laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call it? Trevor showed us the photos of her bruises. The recordings of you threatening her." "What photos? What recordings?" Lucas's mind reeled. "None of that happened." "If she dies," Robert hissed, pressing his face close to Lucas's, "you're dead. I have friends in this city who can make you disappear without a trace." At that moment, Trevor emerged from Victoria's room, his face a perfect mask of concerned friendship tainted with righteous anger. "Lucas, thank God you're here. We need to talk." "You're damn right we need to talk," Lucas said, shaking free from Robert's grip. Trevor's eyes were cold despite his concerned tone. "How could you do this to her? She trusted you, loved you, and you've been systematically destroying her health for months. You lying son of a—" Lucas started forward, but Diana grabbed his arm. "Don't check her purse," she hissed urgently, her grip surprisingly strong. "Whatever you're looking for, it's not there." The warning was so strange, so specific, that it stopped Lucas cold. Diana's eyes held a flicker of something, fear? Guilt? Before he could analyze it further, she released him and stepped back. "I want to see my wife," Lucas said firmly. "The police are on their way," Trevor announced. "They'll want to question you about Victoria's condition." Lucas felt the walls closing in. Whatever game Trevor and Victoria were playing, they'd clearly been setting it up for a while. But Diana's warning about the purse nagged at him. Why would she tell him not to look? Unless— "I need a moment," Lucas said, pushing past them into Victoria's room. Victoria lay in the hospital bed, and 4 drip in her arm, monitors beeping steadily. She looked pale but alert, her eyes tracking his movement as he approached. On the bedside table sat her designer handbag, the expensive black leather Prada bag he'd bought her for their anniversary. "Lucas," Victoria whispered, her voice carefully weak. "I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you, but I was scared." "Scared of what?" Lucas asked, moving closer to the bed. "Of what you do to me," she said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I know you found out about Trevor and me. I know you've been punishing me for months." Lucas stared at his wife, the woman he'd shared his bed, his dreams, his bank accounts with for 3 years. The woman who was now lying with such practiced sincerity that he almost doubted his own memories. Behind him, he could hear Trevor speaking to Robert and Diana in low, urgent tones. Something about evidence, about protecting Victoria, about making sure Lucas paid for what he'd done. But Diana's warning echoed in his mind. Don't check her purse. Lucas reached for the handbag. Don't, Victoria whispered urgently, her weak act dropping for just a moment. Please, Lucas. You don't understand. But Lucas was already opening the bag, his fingers closing around something unexpected. Not makeup or pills or women's accessories. His hand withdrew holding a small digital recorder and a thick manila envelope. The recorder's display showed 47 recorded files. The envelope was labeled in Victoria's handwriting, Project Lucas, Phase 3. What is this? Lucas asked quietly, his voice deadly calm. Victoria's face went white. Through the doorway, Lucas could see Trevor's conversation with Robert falter as he noticed what Lucas held. Lucas pressed play on the first recording. His own voice filled the room, but the words were wrong, stitched together from different conversations, edited to sound like threats. Victoria, if you ever try to leave me, I'll make sure you regret it. You won't survive without me. I'll destroy you before I let you go. The envelope contained photographs, pictures of Victoria with bruises that Lucas had never seen before, medical records showing a pattern of domestic violence that had never happened, and a detailed timeline of alleged abuse spanning 18 months. At the bottom of the envelope was a document that made Lucas's blood freeze, a copy of his will, which left everything to Victoria, and a life insurance policy he'd never signed, worth $2 million, with Victoria as the sole beneficiary. Lucas looked up to find Trevor standing in the doorway, no longer bothering to hide his satisfaction. You shouldn't have looked, Trevor said softly. But I suppose it doesn't matter now. The police will be here in 10 minutes, and they're going to find a very compelling case against you. Except I didn't do any of this, Lucas said, his voice still eerily calm. Prove it, Victoria whispered from the bed, and now her smile was as cold as winter steel. Prove that you didn't slowly poison your wife while she gathered evidence of your abuse, planning to kill her for insurance money and make it look like an accident. Lucas realized he was holding the purse that contained his own carefully constructed downfall. They'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. Every argument, every conversation, every private moment had been recorded and edited. Every bruise, every hospital visit, every piece of evidence had been manufactured to tell a story that would end with his imprisonment and their enrichment. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated who they were dealing with. Lucas Reed had built his fortune by being smarter, harder, and more ruthless than everyone else. And they'd just handed him a masterclass in their own methods. You're right, he said finally, tucking the recorder and envelope back into the purse. I can't prove I didn't do this. Trevor's smile widened. Victoria relaxed slightly against her pillows. But you know what I can prove? Lucas continued, his voice still conversational. I can prove that you're both going to regret this more than anything you've ever done in your lives. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Chapter 3, The Study. Lucas walked out of Sacred Heart Hospital at 4:23 a.m. with the purse under his arm and a plan forming in his mind. Behind him, he could hear Trevor calling his name, demanding he return Victoria's belongings. He ignored them all, the shouting, the threats, the promises that he'd regret this. He had work to do. His first stop was his office. Reed Security Solutions occupied the top 3 floors of a downtown building, its state-of-the-art equipment and surveillance capabilities rivaling those of federal agencies. Lucas had spent years cultivating relationships with hackers, former CIA operatives, and information brokers who asked no questions as long as their payments cleared. By dawn, Lucas had called in every favor he'd accumulated over the past decade. The recorder Victoria had kept contained more than edited conversations. Hidden in its memory were the original, unedited files. Every real conversation she'd recorded, including her planning sessions with Trevor. Lucas spent the morning listening to months of betrayal unfold in high-definition audio. Phase 1 is complete. Victoria's voice crackled through the speakers. Lucas trusts me completely. I've got access to all his accounts, his business files, everything. And he has no idea about us? Trevor's voice. None. The man who prides himself on reading people can't see what's right in front of his face. Sometimes I think he wants to be deceived. Lucas paused the recording. Even knowing what they'd done, hearing Victoria's contempt in her own words felt like swallowing broken glass. The recordings revealed the full scope of their plan. Phase 1 had been gaining his trust and access. Phase 2 had been manufacturing evidence of abuse while slowly transferring assets to accounts Victoria controlled. Phase 3 was supposed to be his death, staged to look like suicide after being exposed as a wife-beater who'd accidentally poisoned his victim. But the recordings contained something else, the voices of other participants. Victoria and Trevor hadn't been working alone. Diana's voice appeared in several files. The life insurance policy needs to look older. Can you backdate the paperwork? Even Robert Manning's voice. Make sure there's enough evidence to convince the police. I want this bastard destroyed. Lucas's own in-laws had been part of the conspiracy from the beginning. The whole family had been acting out their grief and rage at the hospital, following a script they'd rehearsed for months. By noon, Lucas had compiled a complete picture of the conspiracy. Victoria and Trevor had been having an affair for 8 months. They'd used Lucas's own security expertise against him, learning how to manufacture evidence that would pass forensic scrutiny. They'd planned to inherit his business, his assets, and his life insurance while he rotted in prison, or better yet, died by his own hand once the truth about his crimes came out. But information alone wasn't enough. Lucas needed leverage, and he needed it fast. The police would be looking for him by now, and once they started investigating, the manufactured evidence would be hard to overcome. Lucas made his second call to Tommy Restrepo, a former Army Ranger who now ran discreet operations for clients who needed problems solved without paperwork. Tommy owed Lucas more favors than either of them could count. I need surveillance on 3 targets, Lucas said when Tommy answered. Complete coverage, starting immediately. How complete? I want to know what they eat for breakfast, who they call, where they go, who they sleep with. Everything. Duration? Until I say stop. Tommy's silence stretched for several seconds. This is personal, isn't it? Very. Budget? Unlimited. Lucas's third call went to Angela Ruiz, a forensic accountant who specialized in tracking hidden assets and financial fraud. If Victoria and Trevor had been moving his money, Angela would find it. I need you to tear apart 3 people financially, Lucas told her. Bank accounts, investments, property holdings, everything. And I need it done quietly. How quietly? Invisibly. His fourth call was to Marcus Chun, a former federal prosecutor who now defended high-profile criminal cases. Marcus had helped Lucas navigate several legal challenges over the years, always staying just inside the line of ethical behavior. Marcus, I need to know everything about evidence tampering, audio manipulation, and fraud prosecution. And I need you to start preparing a defense for charges that haven't been filed yet. What kind of charges? Attempted murder, domestic violence, fraud. All of which I didn't commit, but all of which someone has spent months framing me for. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Lucas, if you're calling me, that means you're planning something. Whatever you're thinking, be careful. Revenge has a way of consuming the people who pursue it. I'm not pursuing revenge, Lucas said quietly. I'm pursuing justice. There's a difference. His fifth and final call was to someone whose name didn't appear in any of his business records. Vincent Kozlov had emigrated from Eastern Europe 20 years ago with skills that weren't listed on any resume. Lucas had helped Vincent's daughter when she'd been stalked by an ex-boyfriend that the police couldn't touch. Vincent believed in repaying debts. Vincent, I need to ask a favor. For you, anything. I need someone to disappear for a while. Not permanently, Lucas added quickly. Just long enough to learn some manners. How long? A few days. Maybe a week. Consider it done. By evening, Lucas had assembled his team and resources. Tommy's surveillance showed that Trevor and Victoria were staying at the Manning family estate in Lake Forest, presumably for Victoria's recovery and protection from her dangerous husband. Robert Manning had hired private security, ironically, one of Lucas's competitors, to guard the property. Angela's financial investigation revealed that Victoria had been systematically moving assets for 6 months. She'd liquidated their joint investment accounts, transferred the funds to offshore holdings, and even taken out loans against Lucas's business using forged documents. The total theft exceeded $3 million. Marcus's legal research confirmed Lucas's worst fears. The manufactured evidence would be difficult to challenge in court. The audio recordings, even if proven to be edited, could still be admissible as evidence of intent. The faked medical records and photographs would support a compelling narrative of systematic abuse. But Vincent's report was the most interesting. Trevor Walsh wasn't the trust fund dilettante he pretended to be. His consulting work was actually high-end grifting. He specialized in seducing wealthy women, gaining their trust, and manipulating them into transferring assets before disappearing. Victoria wasn't his first victim, she was his seventh. Lucas realized that Trevor had never intended to stay with Victoria. Once Lucas was out of the picture and the money was secured, Trevor would disappear, leaving Victoria to face the consequences alone. The irony wasn't lost on Lucas. Victoria thought she was the predator, but she was actually just another victim in Trevor's long con. This information changed everything. Lucas's original plan had been to expose their conspiracy and clear his name. But now he saw a much more elegant solution, one that would give them exactly what they deserved while keeping his own hands clean. Lucas spent the night refining his strategy. By dawn, he was ready to begin phase 1 of his own plan, giving Trevor Walsh exactly what he wanted and making sure Victoria got exactly what she deserved. Neither of them would see it coming until it was too late. The difference between Lucas and his enemies was simple. They'd underestimated him, but he'd spent his entire career never underestimating anyone. They'd thought they were playing chess against an amateur. They were about to discover they'd brought checkers to a grandmaster's game. Chapter 4. The Hunt Begins. Lucas began his counterattack on Tuesday morning with a phone call that would reshape everything. He dialed the Lake Forest Police Department and asked for Detective Riley Brennan, a 20-year veteran who'd worked several cases with Reed Security Solutions. "Riley, it's Lucas Reed. I need to report a crime." "Jesus, Lucas, half the department is looking for you. Your wife filed a restraining order, and there's a warrant out for." "That's what I'm calling about," Lucas interrupted. "I've been set up. My wife, her lover, and her family have been running a long con against me for months. I have proof." Detective Brennan's silence stretched for several seconds. "What kind of proof?" "Audio recordings of them planning the entire scheme. Financial records showing theft of over $3 million. And evidence that Victoria's lover has done this to at least 6 other women across 3 states. Where are you, Lucas?" "Somewhere safe. But I need you to listen to something before you make any decisions about that warrant." Lucas played 3 minutes of the clearest recordings. Victoria and Trevor discussing how to fake her poisoning, how to edit the audio files, and how to make Lucas's death look like suicide. When the audio stopped, Detective Brennan was quiet for a long time. "Holy shit," he finally whispered. "Lucas, this is conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder. If this is real, it's real, and there's more." Trevor Walsh isn't who he claims to be. His real name is Trevor Kaczynski, and he's wanted for questioning in similar cons in Miami, Denver, and Phoenix. "I'm sending you his file now." Lucas transmitted Vincent's research through a secure connection. Trevor's real identity revealed a pattern of behavior spanning 8 years. He'd target wealthy, married women, seduce them, convince them to betray their husbands, steal their assets, and disappear before the legal consequences caught up with him. "The Manning family isn't innocent either," Lucas continued. "Robert and Diana knew about the plan from the beginning. Diana's the one who created the fake medical records. She works as an administrator at Northwestern Memorial. She's been falsifying documents for months." Detective Brennan absorbed this information. "Lucas, even if all this is true, you can't just disappear. There are procedures. The procedures don't work when the evidence has been manufactured to this degree," Lucas said. "By the time the truth comes out through official channels, they'll have vanished with my money and left me to face charges for crimes I didn't commit. So what are you proposing? Give me 72 hours. I'll deliver them to you with enough evidence to put them all away, and I'll make sure the stolen money is recovered." "Lucas, you're talking about vigilante justice. I'm talking about real justice. The kind that actually solves the problem instead of just shuffling paperwork." Detective Brennan sighed heavily. 72 hours. But if anyone gets hurt, no one will get hurt, Lucas lied smoothly. "I'm not a killer, Riley. I'm a problem solver." After ending the call, Lucas activated the next phase of his plan. Tommy's surveillance team had mapped every movement at the Manning estate. Victoria and Trevor maintained separate bedrooms for appearance's sake, but met in the pool house every evening. Robert Manning left each morning at 8 a.m. for his office. Diana worked day shifts at the hospital Tuesday through Friday. More importantly, Tommy had identified a weakness in their security. The guards were focused on keeping people out, not keeping people in. That evening, Lucas positioned himself in the woods behind the Manning property. Through night vision scopes, he watched Victoria and Trevor meet in the pool house, as expected. Tommy had planted listening devices throughout the building that morning, disguised as routine maintenance. Lucas listened to their conversation through wireless earbuds, recording everything on equipment that would stand up in court. The police released a statement today, Victoria was saying. They're actively searching for Lucas in connection with my poisoning. Perfect, Trevor replied. How long until we can access the rest of the accounts? Another week, maybe 2. Marcus Chun is trying to freeze the assets, but I established power of attorney months ago. It'll hold up long enough. And after that, you disappear like we planned. And I play the grieving widow who's rebuilding her life after discovering her husband was a monster. Lucas smiled grimly. They still thought their plan was working. I've been thinking, Trevor continued, and his tone made Lucas pay closer attention. Maybe I should stay longer. Lucas built something valuable with that security company. With him gone and you in control, we could expand it, use it for our next operations. Our next operations? Victoria's voice sharpened. Trevor, we agreed this was a one-time thing. After this, we both walk away clean. Plans change, sweetheart. Why settle for $3 million when we could build something worth $30 million? Lucas heard the fear enter Victoria's voice. She was beginning to realize what Lucas already knew. Trevor was a predator, and she'd made herself his prey. I don't want to build anything, Victoria said firmly. I want Lucas gone, I want the money, and I want to start over somewhere else. That's not really your choice anymore, Trevor said, and now his voice carried an undertone of menace. You see, you're in this as deep as I am. If I go down, you go down with me. So we're going to do things my way. Lucas heard Victoria's sharp intake of breath. In that moment, he realized his plan needed adjustment. Victoria wasn't just a willing conspirator anymore. She was becoming Trevor's next victim. While Lucas had no sympathy for her situation, she'd made her choices. He could use her fear to his advantage. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Trevor growing more controlling and Victoria growing more frightened. By the time they parted for the night, Victoria looked shaken while Trevor appeared satisfied. Lucas waited until they'd both returned to the main house before activating the next phase of his plan. He sent Victoria a single text message from a burner phone. Meet me at the old quarry tomorrow at midnight. Come alone. We need to talk. Lucas. The quarry was an abandoned limestone pit 15 miles outside the city, a place where he and Victoria had gone hiking during their early courtship. It was isolated, private, and had excellent cell phone coverage. All factors Lucas needed for what came next. He didn't expect Victoria to come alone. In fact, he was counting on her bringing Trevor and possibly Robert Manning. What they didn't know was that Lucas had spent the afternoon turning the quarry into a carefully constructed trap. Tommy's team had positioned motion sensors throughout the area. Angela had prepared financial documents that would make Trevor's theft visible the moment Victoria tried to access certain accounts. Marcus had drafted legal papers that would transfer all assets back to Lucas if signed under duress, something that would appear voluntary but could be challenged later if needed. Most importantly, Vincent had positioned himself and 2 associates at strategic points around the quarry. They wouldn't interfere unless violence erupted, but their presence would ensure that no one left the area without Lucas's permission. Lucas had learned from his enemies' mistakes. They'd tried to destroy him through deception and manufactured evidence. But Lucas understood that the most effective traps were the ones that used people's own greed and fear against them. Tomorrow night, he would offer Trevor Walsh exactly what he wanted, a chance to eliminate Lucas Reed permanently and take everything he'd built. And Victoria would have to choose between the man she'd betrayed and the man who was now betraying her. The beauty of Lucas's trap was that both choices would destroy them. By Thursday evening, Lucas would either be dead or free. But Trevor Walsh and Victoria Reed would both be finished, regardless of which path they chose. The hunt had begun, and Lucas Reed was no longer the prey. Chapter 5, The Trap Springs. Victoria stared at the text message for 3 hours before showing it to Trevor. Lucas's message had arrived at 11 p.m. Wednesday night, just as she was preparing for bed. The timing felt intentional, late enough to rattle her, early enough to let her anxiety build through the sleepless night ahead. It's obviously a trap, Trevor said when she finally showed him the phone. They were in the pool house again, their voices carrying easily to Lucas's hidden microphones. Of course it's a trap, Victoria snapped. The question is what kind of trap, and whether we can turn it against him. Trevor smiled, and Victoria felt a chill at the expression. Over the past week, Trevor had shown sides of himself that made her question everything she thought she knew about him. The charming, supportive lover was being replaced by someone calculating and cold. We can, Trevor said confidently. In fact, this is perfect. If Lucas is stupid enough to come out of hiding, we can end this tonight instead of waiting for the police to find him. End this how? Victoria asked, though she already suspected the answer. The quarry is isolated. If Lucas Reed has a tragic accident while confronting his wife and her lover, well, desperate men do desperate things, especially when they're facing life in prison. Victoria felt her stomach turn. Trevor, we never talked about actually killing him. We never talked about not killing him either, Trevor replied. And circumstances have changed. The longer he's free, the more dangerous he becomes. Besides, dead men don't testify about edited recordings or financial theft. Victoria realized she'd passed a point of no return. When she'd started this scheme, it had been about money and freedom. Now Trevor was talking about murder as casually as he might discuss dinner plans. I can't, she whispered. I married him. I lived with him for 3 years. I can't watch him die. Trevor's expression hardened. You can and you will. Because if you don't, you'll be joining him. You think I'm going to let you walk away from this knowing what you know? The threat was clear, and Victoria understood with crystalline clarity that she'd become exactly what she'd helped Trevor turn Lucas into, a victim trapped in a web of lies and threats. Meanwhile, Lucas listened to their conversation from his position in the woods surrounding the quarry. Everything was proceeding exactly as he'd anticipated. Trevor was showing his true nature. Victoria was realizing her mistake, and both of them were walking directly into the trap he'd prepared. At 11:30 p.m. Thursday, 2 vehicles approached the quarry. The first was Robert Manning's black Mercedes, containing Trevor and Victoria. The second was a dark SUV Lucas didn't recognize, carrying 2 men he also didn't recognize, presumably Trevor's backup plan. Lucas spoke quietly into his radio headset. Tommy, confirm positions. Team 1 in position north side. Team 2 covering the access road. Vincent's people are mobile and ready. Angela, are the financial triggers ready? The moment Victoria tries to access the Cayman accounts, every transfer she's made in the past 6 months will be flagged and frozen. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit will have everything within an hour. Marcus, legal status? The papers are filed and sealed. If anything happens to you tonight, the evidence packets go to the FBI, the IRS, and 3 major newspapers simultaneously. Lucas had learned from his enemies' methods, but he'd improved on them. Where they'd relied on deception and manufactured evidence, he was using the truth as a weapon. Where they'd worked in secret, he was creating multiple witnesses and paper trails. Where they'd planned to destroy him and disappear, he was ensuring that justice would be served regardless of the night's outcome. At exactly midnight, Lucas emerged from the tree line and walked toward the 2 vehicles. His hands were visible and empty, but he wore a Kevlar vest under his jacket and carried a backup weapon in an ankle holster. He'd survived too much to get careless now. Victoria got out of the Mercedes first, her face pale in the moonlight. Trevor followed, keeping slightly behind her, close enough to control her, far enough to avoid being grabbed if Lucas tried anything desperate. The 2 men from the SUV remained by their vehicle, watching but not approaching. Professional muscle, Lucas realized. Trevor had come prepared for violence. Hello, Victoria, Lucas said calmly. Trevor. Lucas. Victoria's voice shook slightly. You look different. She was right. The past week had stripped away the last of Lucas's civility, leaving something harder and more dangerous in its place. The man who'd trusted blindly was gone, replaced by someone who understood that mercy was often just weakness wearing a disguise. I've learned some things about myself recently, Lucas replied. Amazing what you discover when people try to destroy you. Trevor stepped forward slightly. Lucas, this doesn't have to end badly. You're smart enough to see that you're outmaneuvered. Victoria has proof of what you did to her. The police are looking for you, and your assets are already frozen. Actually, Lucas said conversationally, none of that is true anymore. He pulled out a tablet computer and turned it toward them. The screen showed bank account balances, transaction histories, and frozen asset notifications. As of 30 minutes ago, every account you've been transferring money to has been flagged by federal investigators. The Cayman accounts, the Swiss deposits, even the cash you've been moving through your father's construction companies, all frozen and under investigation. Victoria's face went white. That's not possible. I have power of attorney. You have power of attorney over accounts that no longer exist, Lucas interrupted. They've been transferred into federal custody as evidence in an ongoing investigation. Trevor's confident expression faltered. You're bluffing. Call your banker, Lucas suggested. Try to access any of the accounts you've been using. I'll wait. While Trevor frantically worked his phone, Lucas continued speaking to Victoria. Did you know your boyfriend's real name is Trevor Kaczynski? Did you know he's wanted in 3 states for crimes exactly like what he's done to us? Did you know you're victim number 7 in his pattern of seducing married women, stealing their money, and disappearing? Victoria turned to stare at Trevor, who was growing increasingly agitated as his phone calls failed to connect to cooperative bankers. Trevor. Victoria's voice was small. Is that true? Trevor snapped his phone shut and looked at both of them with undisguised hatred. It doesn't matter what's true. What matters is that Lucas Reed dies tonight, and we clean up this mess. He gestured to the 2 men by the SUV, who began walking toward them. I wouldn't, Lucas said calmly. Trevor laughed harshly. You're outnumbered 4-1, Reed. Whatever you think you've accomplished, it ends here. You're right, Lucas agreed. It does end here. Lucas raised his hand, and the quarry erupted in blinding light as flood lamps hidden throughout the area activated simultaneously. In the sudden illumination, Trevor's hired muscle found themselves staring down the barrels of high-powered rifles held by Tommy's team. Trevor Kaczynski, Lucas called out formally, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit murder. Victoria Reed, you're under arrest for the same charges. Detective Riley Brennan emerged from behind one of the equipment sheds, flanked by 4 Lake Forest police officers. How? Trevor whispered, his confidence finally cracking. You taught me an important lesson, Lucas replied. The best traps are the ones that use people's own nature against them. You're a predator, Trevor. You couldn't resist the chance to eliminate a threat and take everything I'd built. And Victoria. He turned to his wife. You're a coward. You couldn't face the consequences of your choices, so you kept making worse choices to avoid the first ones. As the police moved in to make arrests, Victoria looked at Lucas with something that might have been regret. I'm sorry, she whispered. I never meant for it to go this far. Yes, you did, Lucas replied without emotion. You meant every bit of it. You just didn't expect to face consequences. Trevor made one last desperate play, lunging toward Lucas with something metallic in his hand. He never reached his target. Vincent Kozlov appeared from the shadows and put Trevor on the ground with efficient brutality. Stay down, Vincent advised in his accented English. You have caused enough trouble. As Trevor was handcuffed and read his rights, he looked up at Lucas with pure hatred. This isn't over, Reed. You think you've won, but you've just made enemies you can't imagine. Lucas looked down at the man who'd tried to destroy his life and smiled without warmth. Trevor, he said quietly, you have no idea what kind of enemies I can imagine. Chapter 6. Unraveling Threads. The arrests at the quarry were just the beginning. Over the next 48 hours, Lucas watched his carefully orchestrated plan unfold like a symphony of justice, each movement building toward a crescendo that would reshape every life it touched. Detective Brennan's investigation moved with remarkable speed, aided by the comprehensive evidence Lucas had prepared. The unedited audio recordings revealed not just Victoria and Trevor's conspiracy, but their connections to a broader network of financial crimes spanning multiple states. Jesus Christ, Lucas, Detective Brennan muttered as he reviewed the evidence files. This goes deeper than we thought. Your wife's boyfriend, or whatever his real name is, he's been running this con for years. We've got warrants coming in from Florida, Colorado, and Arizona. Lucas nodded grimly. Trevor Kaczynski is smarter than he appeared, but not as smart as he thought. He made the mistake of keeping records of his previous victims. Apparently, he was planning to write a book about his exploits someday. The investigation revealed that Trevor's methods were highly sophisticated. He would research wealthy couples, identify marriages with stress points, and then insert himself into their social circles. He specialized in women who felt neglected or underappreciated, offering them the attention and validation their husbands failed to provide. Victoria hadn't been his first choice in Chicago. She'd been his third. His first two targets had proved too stable in their marriages, too suspicious of his motives. Victoria had been perfectly vulnerable, married to a man whose work consumed him, childless despite wanting children, surrounded by wealth, but feeling emotionally impoverished. The psychological profile is textbook, Dr. Sarah Martinez, the FBI's consulting psychologist, explained to Lucas. Your wife was an ideal victim from Kaczynski's perspective. Intelligent enough to execute complex plans, but emotionally desperate enough to rationalize betraying someone she claimed to love. Lucas found no comfort in understanding Victoria's motives. Desperation didn't excuse treachery, and loneliness didn't justify attempted murder. The financial investigation proved even more damaging to the conspirators. Angela Ruiz had traced every dollar Victoria had stolen, but more importantly, she discovered the money trail leading to Trevor's previous cons bank accounts in 7 different names, property holdings in 12 states, and investment portfolios worth nearly $15 million, all acquired through systematic theft from trusting women who'd thought they were escaping unhappy marriages. The pattern is consistent, Angela reported. Kaczynski targets women in marriages where the husband is successful but emotionally absent. He seduces them, gains their trust, convinces them to steal from their husbands, and then disappears with the money while they face the legal consequences. What happened to the other women? Lucas asked, though he suspected he already knew. 3 are in prison. 2 committed suicide. 1 moved to Costa Rica and lives under an assumed name. None of them ever saw Trevor Kaczynski again after he got what he wanted. Lucas realized that Victoria's fate would have been identical, regardless of whether their plan against him had succeeded. Trevor had never intended to share a future with her. She'd been just another mark in his long career of predation. The discovery of Trevor's real identity and criminal history transformed the case from a domestic dispute into a federal investigation. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit took over the prosecution, with Detective Brennan serving as the local liaison. Robert Manning and Diana Manning were arrested on the second day after the quarry confrontation. Diana's falsification of medical records had left a digital trail that was impossible to hide once investigators knew where to look. Robert's involvement in moving stolen money through his construction company's accounts made him an accessory to federal crimes. Dad tried to protect us, Diana sobbed during her interrogation, according to Detective Brennan. Victoria told us Lucas was abusing her, threatening to kill her. We thought we were saving her life. Lucas felt no sympathy for the Manning family's rationalizations. They participated in a conspiracy to frame him for attempted murder without bothering to verify Victoria's claims or seek legitimate help. Their willingness to believe the worst about him revealed more about their character than his. The most damaging evidence came from Trevor's own records. In his arrogance, he documented his methods meticulously, creating detailed profiles of each victim and step-by-step accounts of how he'd manipulated them. Victoria's file was labeled Subject 7, the security expert's wife, and contained intimate details of her psychological vulnerabilities and sexual preferences. When Detective Brennan showed Lucas excerpts from Trevor's files, the clinical coldness of the analysis was breathtaking. Subject 7 exhibits classic symptoms of emotional neglect and validation-seeking behavior. Trevor had written, "Husband's focus on work creates vulnerability to attention and affection from external sources. Subject responds well to intellectual flattery combined with subtle criticism of husband's emotional availability. Sexual dissatisfaction provides additional leverage." Lucas realized that every moment of Victoria's relationship with Trevor had been calculated manipulation. The spontaneous encounters, the passionate declarations of love, the shared plans for their future, all of it had been scripted by a predator who saw her as nothing more than a resource to exploit. The evidence was so overwhelming that plea negotiations began within a week. Trevor's attorney, faced with charges in multiple states and evidence of a pattern spanning 8 years, advised him to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. Victoria's situation was more complex. While clearly guilty of conspiracy and theft, she could also claim to be a victim of Trevor's manipulation. Her attorney pushed for a plea deal that would acknowledge her culpability while recognizing her status as a victim of psychological manipulation. Lucas found himself in the unusual position of being consulted about the plea negotiations. The prosecutors wanted his input on what constitutes adequate justice for the people who'd tried to destroy his life. What do you want to see happen to them? Assistant U.S. Attorney Patricia Walsh asked during a meeting in her downtown office. Lucas considered the question carefully. Revenge would have been satisfying, but he'd learned that true victory lay in ensuring the guilty faced appropriate consequences while he rebuilt his life stronger than before. I want Trevor Kaczynski to serve enough time that he can't hurt anyone else, Lucas said finally. 10 years minimum, with restitution to all his victims. And I want him registered as a financial predator so any future romantic partner can know what they're dealing with. And your wife? Lucas thought about Victoria, the woman who'd shared his bed while planning his destruction, who'd looked him in the eye and lied with practiced sincerity, who'd nearly succeeded in framing him for attempted murder. Victoria made her choices with full knowledge of the consequences, he said. She's responsible for her actions, regardless of how effectively Trevor manipulated her. But I don't need to see her destroyed. I just need to never see her again. 2 weeks after the quarry confrontation, the plea negotiations concluded. Trevor Kaczynski pled guilty to federal charges in 4 states and received 12 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for the first 8 years. He was also ordered to pay restitution to his victims, though the recovered money wouldn't fully compensate everyone he'd robbed. Victoria pled guilty to conspiracy, fraud, and attempted filing of false police reports. She received 3 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. The plea agreement required her to surrender all claims to Lucas's assets and to testify against Trevor in any future prosecutions. Robert Manning pled guilty to accessory charges and received 2 years in federal prison. Diana Manning, as a first-time offender who'd been manipulated by her sister, received 18 months in a minimum security facility. The Manning family's real estate empire collapsed under the weight of legal fees and frozen assets. Properties were sold to pay restitution and attorney fees. The family that had once threatened Lucas's life was now financially ruined and criminally convicted. But for Lucas, the greatest victory wasn't their punishment. It was the complete recovery of everything they'd tried to steal. His money, his reputation, his business, and his freedom were all intact. More importantly, he learned exactly what he was capable of when pushed to his limits. Standing in his office on a Friday evening 3 weeks after the arrests, Lucas looked out at the Chicago skyline and reflected on the lessons of the past month. He'd entered this ordeal as a trusting man who believed loyalty was reciprocal. He was ending it as someone who understood that trust must be earned continuously and that mercy was a luxury he could no longer afford. Lucas Reed had survived their trap and turned it against them. Now it was time to build something new from the ashes of his old life. Something harder, smarter, and utterly unforgiving to those who would betray it. The man who'd nearly been destroyed was gone. In his place stood someone who would never again make the mistake of underestimating human greed or overestimating human loyalty. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. 6 months after the arrests, Lucas stood in the federal courthouse watching Trevor Kaczynski receive his sentence. 12 years had seemed adequate when negotiated as a plea deal. Hearing it pronounced in open court felt like victory vindicated. Trevor had aged visibly during his time in federal custody. The confident charm that had seduced 7 women and nearly destroyed Lucas's life was gone, replaced by the hollow look of a predator stripped of his hunting grounds. When he glanced back at Lucas in the gallery, his eyes held nothing but hatred and the bitter knowledge of defeat. Victoria's sentencing had taken place 2 weeks earlier. Lucas had attended that hearing as well, not out of lingering affection, but to ensure closure. She'd looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her choices and the reality of their consequences. Her attorney had argued for leniency based on Trevor's manipulation, but the judge had been unimpressed. Mrs. Reed, Judge Harrison had said during sentencing, you were not a naive teenager seduced by a smooth-talking older man. You were a grown woman who chose to betray your husband's trust, steal his money, and attempt to frame him for attempted murder. Your victim status with regard to Mr. Kaczynski doesn't erase your perpetrator status with regard to your husband. 3 years in federal prison. Victoria would serve at least 30 months before being eligible for supervised release. Lucas felt no satisfaction in her punishment, only relief that the chapter was finally closed. But Trevor's sentencing brought a different emotion, professional admiration for a system that, when properly motivated, could deliver genuine justice. As Trevor was led away in shackles, he turned back one last time. "This isn't over, Reed," he called out, his voice carrying across the courtroom. "You think you've won, but all you've done is make an enemy who has nothing left to lose." Lucas smiled coldly and spoke just loud enough for Trevor to hear. "You had everything to lose when you started this. Now you know what having nothing feels like." The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, drawn by the sensational nature of the case. Lucas ignored their shouted questions and walked to his car, where Tommy Restrepo was waiting. "Feel better?" Tommy asked as they drove away from the courthouse. "I feel finished," Lucas replied. "For the first time in 6 months, I can focus on something other than ensuring justice gets served." The past half-year had been transformative for Lucas in ways that went far beyond resolving the conspiracy against him. Reed Security Solutions had not only survived the scandal, but had thrived because of it. The media attention surrounding his case had demonstrated his investigative capabilities in the most dramatic way possible, and new clients had flooded in seeking his services. More importantly, the experience had refined Lucas's understanding of human nature and sharpened his instincts for detecting deception. He'd rebuilt his company's procedures with hard-earned wisdom about the depths of betrayal people were capable of. "Any word from the Manning family?" Tommy asked. "Robert gets out in 8 months," Lucas replied. "Diana's already been released to a halfway house. The family's broke, the business is gone, and their reputation is destroyed. They got exactly what they earned." Tommy glanced at him curiously. "You don't sound satisfied." "I'm not looking for satisfaction," Lucas said. "I was looking for resolution. There's a difference." The difference was crucial to Lucas's psychology. Revenge would have required him to actively pursue their destruction, to take pleasure in their suffering, to define himself by their downfall. Resolution simply required him to ensure that justice was served and then move forward with his life. Lucas had chosen resolution because revenge would have made him into the kind of person who defined himself by his enemies' failures rather than his own successes. He'd seen too many people consumed by the need for vengeance, their lives becoming monuments to the people who'd wronged them. That evening, Lucas returned to the penthouse apartment he'd purchased after selling the house he'd shared with Victoria. The old house held too many memories of deception. This new space was entirely his own, decorated according to his preferences, secured according to his specifications. Angela Ruiz had recovered 96% of the stolen money, along with interest and penalties that Trevor and Victoria would be paying for decades to come. The recovered funds had allowed Lucas to expand Reed Security Solutions into new markets and hire additional specialists. Vincent Kozlov had accepted a permanent position as Lucas's head of security, bringing with him a team of former military and intelligence operatives who shared his philosophy that the best defense was thorough preparation for overwhelming offense. Marcus Chun had restructured Lucas's legal affairs to prevent future exploitation, creating multiple layers of protection around his assets and business interests. The new arrangements were so comprehensive that even a legitimate spouse would find it difficult to access Lucas's wealth without his explicit consent. The changes weren't just practical, they were psychological. Lucas had evolved from a man who trusted until given reason not to, into someone who required proof of trustworthiness before extending even basic confidence. The transformation had made him more effective in business, but less accessible in personal relationships. Lucas was comfortable with this trade-off. He'd learned that his previous openness had been a luxury he could no longer afford. Trust was now something to be earned over time through consistent actions, not granted freely based on words and appearances. As he reviewed the day's business reports, Lucas's secure phone rang. The caller ID showed Detective Brennan's number. "Lucas, we need to talk. Can you come to the station?" "What's this about?" "Trevor Kaczynski. He's been making calls from prison. We think he's trying to arrange something." Lucas felt a familiar coldness settle over him. "What kind of something?" "The kind that involves you not being around to enjoy your victory." Lucas was silent for several seconds, processing the implications. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. At the police station, Detective Brennan laid out the situation with characteristic directness. Federal monitors had intercepted several phone calls between Trevor and associates who weren't part of his original conspiracy, people with criminal connections that extended far beyond financial fraud. The conversations are coded, Detective Brennan explained, but the meaning is clear enough. Trevor's using what money he can still access to hire people who specialize in permanent solutions to problems. Professional killers, Lucas said flatly. That's our assessment. The FBI's taking this seriously. They're recommending witness protection. Lucas almost laughed at the suggestion. Riley, I'm not hiding from Trevor Kaczynski or anyone he can hire. If he wants to escalate this beyond the legal system, then we'll handle it outside the legal system. Lucas, this isn't about pride. These people are dangerous professionals. So am I, Lucas replied calmly. And I have advantages Trevor doesn't. Such as, I know this is coming. I have resources he doesn't. And I have friends who are significantly more dangerous than anyone he can afford to hire. Detective Brennan studied Lucas's expression and apparently decided not to argue further. Just be careful. Trevor's got nothing left to lose, which makes him more dangerous than when he was just greedy. As Lucas left the police station, he called Vincent Kozlov. Vincent, we have a problem. How serious? Trevor's trying to hire professionals to solve his Lucas problem permanently. Vincent was quiet for several seconds. I see. What are your instructions? Full protection protocols as of tonight. And Vincent? Yes. If Trevor's people make a move against me, I want you to make sure they understand that professional killers work both ways. Understood. And Trevor himself? Lucas considered the question. Trevor Kaczynski had started this war with deception and theft. Now he was escalating to attempted murder. Each escalation had failed because Lucas had been smarter, better prepared, and more ruthless than his enemies expected. Trevor made a choice to make this personal, Lucas said finally. If he wants to play by those rules, then we'll play by those rules. But we'll play better than he ever imagined. Vincent's chuckle held no warmth. I will make the necessary arrangements. Lucas hung up and looked out at the Chicago skyline. For 6 months, he'd worked within the legal system to ensure justice was served. He'd chosen resolution over revenge, healing over hatred. But Trevor Kaczynski had just changed the rules of engagement. If he wanted to turn this into a war, then Lucas would give him exactly what he was asking for. The difference was that Lucas had spent his entire career preparing for wars, while Trevor had spent his career preying on victims who wouldn't fight back. Trevor was about to discover that Lucas Reed was nobody's victim. Chapter 8, The Counterstrike. The first attempt on Lucas's life came 3 weeks after Trevor's sentencing, on a rainy Thursday evening as Lucas walked from his office building to the parking garage. Professional execution, a sniper positioned on a rooftop 4 blocks away, using a high-powered rifle with a sophisticated scope. The shot never came. Vincent's security team had identified the threat 6 hours earlier through electronic surveillance of nearby buildings and rooftop access points. When the sniper took his position, he found himself staring down the barrels of 3 counter-snipers who'd been waiting for him. The would-be assassin was named Carlos Mendez, a former Army Ranger turned mercenary with a reputation for clean, long-distance eliminations. Under interrogation by federal agents, he admitted to being contracted through intermediaries connected to Trevor Kaczynski. Kaczynski's using prison connections to coordinate this. FBI agent Patricia Volkov explained to Lucas during a briefing the next day. We've identified at least 2 more contracts outstanding against you. Lucas listened impassively. What are you doing about it? We're working with prison officials to limit Kaczynski's communications and identify his contacts. But the system has limitations. I don't, Lucas interrupted. Agent Volkov studied his expression carefully. Mr. Reed, I hope you're not considering taking matters into your own hands. Vigilante justice isn't justice at all, Lucas finished. It's self-defense. The second attempt came 5 days later. Vincent's team intercepted intelligence about a car bomb being prepared in a South Side garage. The device was sophisticated, military-grade explosives with a remote detonator, designed to eliminate Lucas and anyone within 50 feet of his vehicle. Rather than simply disable the bomb, Vincent orchestrated a more educational response. The device was carefully relocated to an abandoned warehouse, where it was detonated in full view of the man who'd built it. Watching his creation destroy an empty building instead of his intended target provided Anthony Torino with a clear message about the futility of accepting contracts against Lucas Reed. The message is being received, Vincent reported. Word is spreading in the relevant communities that targeting you is unprofitable. But Lucas knew that messages weren't enough. As long as Trevor remained alive and motivated, he would continue finding new ways to strike. The legal system had handled the original conspiracy, but it was inadequate for dealing with an ongoing assassination campaign. Lucas made a decision that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier, back when he still believed that civilization's rules applied to civilized conflicts. Vincent, I need you to arrange a meeting. With whom? With Trevor Kaczynski. Vincent raised an eyebrow. He is in federal prison. People meet with prisoners every day. Lawyers, family members, spiritual advisors. I'm sure we can find an appropriate category for my visit. The meeting was arranged through Marcus Chun, who filed paperwork identifying Lucas as a potential witness in ongoing federal investigations. Technically true, since Lucas possessed evidence about Trevor's other victims that hadn't yet been used in prosecution. Federal Correctional Institution Greenville was a medium-security facility 2 hours outside Chicago. Lucas had visited prisons before while investigating cases, but never with such personal stakes. The institutional atmosphere of controlled desperation felt appropriate for his confrontation with Trevor. Trevor appeared in the visitor room looking like a man who discovered that predators could become prey. Prison life had stripped away the last pretenses of charm and sophistication, revealing the hollow core beneath. But his eyes still held the intelligent malice that had made him dangerous. Lucas Reed, Trevor said as he sat down across from the reinforced glass partition. I wondered when you'd come to gloat. I'm not here to gloat, Lucas replied evenly. I'm here to make you an offer. Trevor's laugh was bitter. What could you possibly offer me? Your life. The laughter stopped. Trevor leaned forward, studying Lucas's expression for signs of deception or weakness. He found neither. Explain. You've been hiring people to kill me, Lucas said conversationally. 3 attempts so far, all failures. But the pattern concerns me. Not because I'm afraid of your hired killers. My security is better than your procurement. But because this situation is becoming inefficient. Inefficient how? Every assassin you send against me has to be dealt with permanently. Every intermediary who helps you coordinate these attacks becomes a security risk that must be eliminated. You're forcing me to kill people who would otherwise live normal, productive lives of crime. Trevor's eyes narrowed. You're not a killer, Reed. You proved that at the quarry when you called the police instead of putting a bullet in my head. 6 months ago, you would have been right, Lucas agreed. But circumstances change people. You've changed me into someone willing to do whatever is necessary to protect what's mine. To prove his point, Lucas slid a tablet computer across the small shelf beneath the glass partition. The screen showed surveillance footage of a man Trevor would recognize, Marcus Delacroix, the intermediary who'd been coordinating the assassination contracts from a bar in New Orleans. The footage showed Delacroix entering the bar on Tuesday evening. It did not show him leaving. Marcus had an accident, Lucas said quietly. Carbon monoxide leak in his apartment. Very tragic. The police found evidence of your assassination contracts in his files, along with names and contact information for several other people in your network. Trevor's face went pale. You're lying. Lucas switched to another video file. This one showed Anthony Torino, the bomb maker, in what appeared to be a hospital bed. Most of his body was wrapped in bandages. Anthony survived the explosion that destroyed his workshop, Lucas continued. But he'll never build another bomb. The burns were quite extensive. He's decided to retire from the explosives business and has provided federal investigators with detailed information about everyone who's ever hired him. A third video file showed Carlos Mendez in what was obviously a morgue, a toe tag visible on his foot. Carlos resisted questioning. Lucas explained. Apparently, he tried to escape federal custody and was shot while fleeing. These things happen when people make poor choices about which contracts to accept. Trevor sat in stunned silence, finally understanding the depth of his miscalculation. He'd assumed that Lucas would remain constrained by legal and moral boundaries. Instead, Lucas had simply expanded his definition of appropriate responses. Now, Lucas continued, we reach the question of efficiency. I can continue killing everyone you hire to kill me, but that's wasteful and time-consuming. Or we can address the root cause of the problem, which is you. Trevor felt sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the visitor room. What are you proposing? You have 2 choices, Lucas said. Choice 1, You continue trying to have me killed. In response, I'll systematically eliminate everyone in your network until you run out of contacts. Then I'll arrange for you to have an unfortunate accident in prison. Inmates who target law-abiding citizens sometimes face rough justice from their fellow prisoners. Trevor's mouth went dry. Prison hierarchies were brutal towards certain types of criminals, and inmates with enough money and influence could arrange almost anything. Choice 2. Trevor asked weakly. You call off all contracts against me, forever. You serve your sentence quietly, and when you're released, you disappear permanently to some country that doesn't extradite to the United States. In exchange, I stop killing the people you care about. What people I care about? Trevor tried to sound defiant, but his voice cracked. Lucas switched to a final video file. This one showed a young woman in her early 20s, clearly Trevor's daughter based on facial similarities. She was walking across a college campus, unaware of the camera tracking her movements. Jennifer Kaczynski, sophomore at Northwestern University, Lucas said softly. Majoring in pre-law, planning to become a prosecutor. She hasn't spoken to you since your arrest, but she's still your daughter. It would be tragic if something happened to her because of choices you made. Trevor's hands pressed against the glass partition. You bastard. She's innocent. So was I, Lucas replied without emotion. Innocence doesn't provide protection when people decide you're an obstacle to what they want. You taught me that lesson. For the first time since the conversation began, Trevor looked genuinely afraid. You wouldn't hurt her. I wouldn't prefer to hurt her, Lucas corrected. But if you force me to choose between her life and mine, I'll choose mine every time. That's another lesson you taught me. Trevor slumped back in his chair, the fight draining out of him. He'd underestimated his opponent in every possible way. Lucas's intelligence, his resources, his connections, and most critically, his willingness to abandon moral constraints when survival was at stake. What guarantee do I have that you'll honor your side of the bargain? Trevor asked. The same guarantee I had that you'd honor your marriage vows to Victoria, Lucas replied. None whatsoever. But unlike you, I don't break promises unless someone breaks them first. Trevor sat in silence for several minutes, weighing his options. Finally, he looked up at Lucas with something approaching respect mixed with fear. All contracts are canceled as of today, he said quietly. When I get out, I'll disappear. You'll never hear from me again. I know I won't, Lucas agreed. Because if I do, the last thing you'll hear is your daughter screaming. Lucas stood to leave, then paused. Trevor, there's one more thing you should understand. 6 months ago, you chose to make an enemy of Lucas Reed. That Lucas Reed was a decent man who believed in justice and mercy, but you destroyed him. The person you're dealing with now is who you created, someone who learned from your methods and improved on them. Trevor looked up at his former victim with dawning horror. What have I done? You've won, Lucas said softly. You wanted to change me, and you succeeded completely. The Lucas Reed who trusted blindly and forgave easily is gone forever. In his place is someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous than you ever imagined. Congratulations, Trevor. You created exactly the enemy you deserved. As Lucas walked out of the prison, leaving Trevor to contemplate the consequences of his choices, he felt neither satisfaction nor regret. He felt only the cold certainty that he would never again be anyone's victim. Trevor Kaczynski had tried to destroy Lucas Reed through deception and betrayal. Instead, he'd forged him into something far more formidable than the man he'd originally targeted. Chapter 9. The New Order. 2 years after Trevor's sentencing, Lucas Reed stood in his new office on the 40th floor of Willis Tower, looking out over a Chicago that had become his kingdom. Reed Security Solutions now occupied 3 full floors and employed over 200 people, making it one of the most successful private investigation firms in the Midwest. The transformation hadn't been purely professional. Lucas himself had evolved into someone barely recognizable from the man who trusted his wife and his best friend with his life and his fortune. The Lucas Reed who'd believed in the fundamental goodness of people was gone, replaced by someone who understood that trust was a luxury that weak men couldn't afford. Vincent Kozlov knocked on the office door and entered without waiting for a response, a privilege earned through 2 years of unwavering loyalty. The quarterly reports, Vincent said, placing a folder on Lucas's desk. Revenue is up 38% from last year. The expansion into corporate counterintelligence is exceeding projections. Lucas nodded without looking at the numbers. Financial success was gratifying, but it wasn't his primary motivation anymore. He'd learned that money was just a means to power, and power was the only reliable protection against betrayal. "Any word from our former friends?" Lucas asked. Victoria was released from federal prison last month. She moved to Portland, Oregon, changed her name to Victoria Stevens, and works as a receptionist for a small law firm. She makes $28,000 a year and lives in a studio apartment. Lucas felt no sympathy for his ex-wife's reduced circumstances. She'd made choices, and choices had consequences. The fact that she was alive and free was more mercy than she deserved. Trevor, still serving his sentence, due for release in 8 years, assuming good behavior. Our sources inside the prison confirm he's caused no trouble and has made no attempts to contact outside associates. Lucas wasn't surprised. Their prison meeting had established a clear understanding about the costs of breaking their agreement. Trevor might be many things, but he wasn't stupid enough to risk his daughter's safety for revenge he couldn't afford. The Manning family? Robert Manning died of a heart attack 6 months ago. Diana works as a cashier at a grocery store in Wisconsin. No contact with Victoria since the trial. The destruction of the Manning family had been thorough and permanent. Their real estate empire was gone, their reputation was ruined, and their family bonds had been severed by the weight of their crimes. They'd gotten exactly what they'd earned through their participation in the conspiracy. Lucas turned from the window to face Vincent. "What about the special projects?" Vincent smiled, and the expression held genuine warmth, something reserved exclusively for Lucas and a handful of other people who'd earned his respect through demonstrated loyalty. Project 7 is complete. The target never knew what happened, but his victims have been fully compensated, and he will never hurt anyone again. Project 7 had been Lucas's response to learning about another Trevor Kaczynski-style predator operating in Los Angeles. Rather than alert authorities who might take months or years to build a prosecutable case, Lucas had simply eliminated the problem directly. The predator in question had suffered a series of unfortunate accidents that left him permanently disabled and financially ruined. It was illegal, immoral, and absolutely effective. Project 12. The evidence has been delivered to appropriate authorities. The target will be arrested within the week. Project 12 involved a corrupt federal judge who'd been taking bribes to fix sentences for wealthy defendants. Rather than work through internal oversight mechanisms that might take years, Lucas had gathered evidence of the corruption and delivered it directly to journalists and prosecutors who could act immediately. Lucas had discovered that justice worked more efficiently when good people had the information they needed to act decisively. Excellent. What else requires my attention? Vincent consulted his tablet. We have 3 new client consultations this afternoon. A Fortune 500 CEO who suspects his wife is planning to eliminate him for insurance money. A federal prosecutor who believes someone is targeting her family because of a case she's working. And a request from a woman in Miami whose husband disappeared under suspicious circumstances. She thinks his business partner had him killed. Each case represented the same fundamental problem. People who trusted others with their lives, their fortunes, and their futures, only to discover that trust was being used as a weapon against them. Lucas had built his new business model around serving such people. Reed Security Solutions didn't just investigate crimes, it prevented them. It didn't just gather evidence, it eliminated threats. And it didn't just seek justice through legal channels. It delivered justice through whatever means proved most effective. Schedule them all, Lucas decided. And Vincent, make sure they understand our terms of service before they commit to our assistance. Those terms had evolved considerably from Lucas's original business practices. Reed Security Solutions now operated under what Lucas privately called the No Survivors policy. If someone hired the company for protection against criminal threats, those threats would be eliminated permanently. Not arrested, not prosecuted, not given opportunities to try again later, eliminated. It was an expensive service, but Lucas's clients were willing to pay premium prices for permanent solutions to their problems. The afternoon consultations proceeded exactly as Lucas expected. 3 successful, intelligent people who'd made the mistake of trusting others completely, now facing the consequences of that trust. In each case, the clients had already tried working through legal channels and found them inadequate. The Fortune 500 CEO's wife was indeed planning his murder, but she'd been careful to leave no evidence that would satisfy criminal prosecutors. The federal prosecutor's family was being stalked by associates of a defendant she'd convicted, but the stalking was too sophisticated to prove in court. The Miami woman's missing husband had indeed been murdered by his business partner, but the killer had created an elaborate alibi that would be difficult to overcome through normal investigation. All three cases would have frustrated the old Lucas Reed, who would have spent months gathering evidence for legal proceedings that might ultimately fail. The new Lucas Reed saw only problems requiring solutions. "I can help all of you," Lucas told them during the group consultation. "But you need to understand that my methods have evolved considerably from traditional private investigation. I don't just find evidence, I solve problems. Permanently." The CEO looked uncomfortable. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means that after I accept your case, you'll never have to worry about your wife's plans again. She won't be arrested, because there won't be enough left of her conspiracy to prosecute. The people helping her will discover that targeting my clients carries consequences they hadn't considered." The federal prosecutor leaned forward. "Are you talking about vigilante justice?" "I'm talking about effective justice," Lucas corrected. "The legal system works when criminals make mistakes and leave evidence and confess under questioning. It fails when criminals are smart enough to avoid those mistakes. In those cases, alternative methods become necessary." The Miami woman spoke for the first time. "Can you prove my husband was murdered?" "I can do better than that," Lucas replied. "I can ensure that his killer faces appropriate consequences for what he's done, regardless of whether those consequences come through legal channels or through other means." All three clients hired Reed Security Solutions that day. They were willing to pay any price for permanent solutions to problems that threatened everything they'd built in their lives. Lucas understood their desperation because he'd lived it himself. The difference was that he'd been forced to learn hard lessons about survival and justice through bitter experience. His clients could benefit from his education without suffering through their own. As evening fell over Chicago, Lucas reviewed the day's work with satisfaction. 3 more problems would be solved within the month. 3 more sets of criminals would discover that preying on successful people carried risks they hadn't calculated. And Lucas Reed would continue building his empire on the fundamental truth Trevor Kaczynski had taught him. In a world where trust could be weaponized, the only safety lay in being more dangerous than your enemies. The man who'd once believed in the goodness of people was gone forever. In his place stood someone who understood that the only reliable protection against human predators was the proven ability to destroy them completely. Lucas Reed had become exactly what the world had forced him to become. A man who never forgave, never forgot, and never again made the mistake of trusting anyone who hadn't earned it through years of demonstrated loyalty. Victoria, Trevor, and the Manning family had wanted to change his life. They'd succeeded beyond their wildest nightmares. The purse that had revealed their conspiracy had changed everything, just as they'd planned. But instead of destroying Lucas Reed, it had transformed him into someone far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined possible. And in a city full of people who trusted to wrong others with their lives and fortunes, Lucas Reed had found his true calling, ensuring that predators faced consequences that civilized society was too weak to deliver. Justice, as Lucas had learned, was too important to leave to the justice system. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.